So when we're talking about the endocrine system, you have to start at the very beginning because that's a very good place to start. So we start with the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is your master gland. It controls almost all the other endocrine systems. Not all of them, but most of them. So it's in your skull. It's at the base of your skull, and we'll go over its anatomy. But it's controlled by the hypothalamus, it sits right below. So here's our pituitary, here. And here is our brain. Here is your optic chiasm. And here is your hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus secretes factors that then control the anterior pituitary, and we'll go into some of those details. The pituitary has an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. The pituitary gland, both the anterior and posterior lobes, are, as you can see from the illustration, regulate lots of different parts of the body. They control growth, water balance, your metabolic rate, sexual maturity, responses to stress in the environment, and that's just to name a few of the things that the pituitary gland has an influence over. So the pituitary gland is an extension of kind of your brain. It sits up in the top of the base of the skull, kind of at the bottom of the brain, top of the skull. So here is, to get oriented, here's your hard palate, here. Here's your nose. There's your frontal sinus. There's your sphenoid sinus. And here is a bony landmark that we call the sella turcica, or Turkish saddle. And it's kind of a bony prominence, and right in the middle is your pituitary gland. Just above it is your hypothalamus, right here. And because I can't help it, I have to review some neuroanatomy. Here's your brainstem, and here's your thalamus. Here's that lateral ventricle. So in the illustration, it shows the sella turcica, this nice, this bony landmark, and here is our pituitary nestled within it, and the hypothalamus sitting above it. As the illustration shows, which I can't show in the image because it's too low of magnification, is how vascular the pituitary gland is. And you know it's important because it's sitting in this bony cavity that really protects it. Just a side note, if you are ever dissecting brains, if you ever have that opportunity to, and you're removing a brain from a skull, whether it be human or rodent or any other animal model, when you remove the brain, the pituitary will almost always stay in the sella turcica. It is so tightly bound in there that you'll pull out the brain and the pituitary never comes with it. It always stays in the skull. It's connected to the brain by what's called the pituitary stalk, which is here. And that is a very important structure through which hormones are going to migrate. It's highly vascular. The pituitary is really, really close to the hypothalamus. And it's so close and for a reason. It's non-transplantable. So when we talk about the endocrine system, hormones are secreted into the vasculature. They float around the entire body and get to their targets. They're not in hugely high levels, but high enough so that if something is secreted in my thorax, it can get all the way to my pelvis, no problem. The pituitary is very, very, very dependent on the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus doesn't secrete huge amounts of peptides that control the pituitary. So all of the secretory neurons that live here in the hypothalamus are secreted in relatively low amounts. And so they have to get to here and to here, the anterior and posterior lobes. And because they're in low concentrations, the pituitary must be very close to the source of the factors that regulate it. If I took my thyroid gland, for example, and stuck it down under my kidney capsule, it would work just fine. It would get the information it needs from the pituitary, and we'll talk about the ins and outs of this as this MOOC progresses, and it would still secrete thyroid hormone, which would go everywhere. If I put my pituitary gland underneath my kidney capsule, it's not going to work because these factors are in such low concentration that by the time they got all the way to my kidney capsule area via the blood supply, they just would be so dilute that they wouldn't have any effect. So the pituitary and the hypothalamus are very closely linked, very closely related, and the pituitary can't function unless it's really close to the source of the factors that regulate it, and those are made in the hypothalamus. In the next section, we're going to talk about the posterior pituitary gland, and then we'll talk about the anterior pituitary.